Thank you very much, Rav Moshe Lichtenstein. I very much appreciate for your words. And Rav Moshe Taragin has just joined us, and we'll just give him a minute to get organized and for everybody else to join. And at the same time, thank Rav Moshe once again. The topic Rav Moshe Taragin is speaking on, is there one truth to Torah?
Of people in a way that's non-hallucinatory, in a way that's verifiable, and in a way that lends durability and sturdiness to our faith and to our theology. No other religion has ever staked that claim. Our religion doesn't string through a dream that's interpreted as a divine mandate. Our religion isn't a product of students' reports of great deeds and great miracles performed by their teacher. Our religion, our faith, our truth, our word of God is directly delivered in a mass setting in a manner that can't be mistaken for hallucination. And that's why the events of Har Sinai have to be recorded and relived and to a degree reenacted on an annual basis through reading the Torah, maintaining Shavuos in a much more celebrated fashion every 7 years during the process of Hakel. And to a degree, HaKadosh Baruch Hu embeds us with this verity and this certainty to help outlast some of the trials and tribulations of Jewish history. Pasuk in Yisro says, "V'avor nasas eschem bahar Elokim, v'avor tirasah panechem levoti sechato." HaKadosh Baruch Hu will appear to you so directly because he will try you and he will test you throughout history. History won't always shine on the Jewish people. The world around us won't always reflect the selection of the Jewish people, but we all return to that one frozen moment in time at Har Sinai, which, as I said before, is immutable and irreversible and absolute. And everyone that walks into the Beis Medrash knows that there's nothing absolute about a Gemara, and there's nothing absolute about a Shir, and there's nothing absolute about different Hashkafos. And somehow there's a need to reconcile between the absolute and unimpinged nature and unimpeachable nature of Har Sinai and the pluralism and the diversity and the coloration of Torah. So today let's try to get a handle, let's frame it, how the Chazal articulate it, what are the limits, in a brief manner. This week's Parsha, we described the various upcoming Parsha. We described in Eretz Yisrael, we'll read it. In Chutz La'aretz, will be the second day of Shavuos. You'll have to wait a week to read Parshas Naso. The gifts of the princes. One of the gifts were Mizrakei Kesef. These wine holders that were used to sprinkle wine or to hold wine. And these wine holders, or wine, not really decanters, but Mizrak Yayin, they were priced at 70 shekel. Everyone knows Shivim shekel b'shekel hakodesh nehem b'leim. So they were priced at 70 shekel. Why were they priced at 70 shekel? So the Gemara, actually it's a Medrash. The Medrash interprets, I'm sharing my screen, Shivim shekel, lama kashem shayayin cheshbono shivim, kach yesh shivim panim latara. Yayin is a metaphor in Chazal's world for Torah, for many reasons. Torah is compared primarily to three liquids, to water, wine, and to oil. It's based on the pasuk in Shir HaShirim, Heviani al beis hayayin, B'diglo alay ahava. God took us to his wine cellar as a sign of intimacy, and he raised this flag. With the beginning of Shir HaShirim, Ki tovim dodecha miyayin. So if wine, or these containers were meant to house wine, the gematria of wine is 70. Nun is 50, the 2 years are 10. But just like wine has 70, just like Torah, has 70 different interpretations, similarly, these wine holders were priced or weighed in at 70 shekel. Namely, Chazal's first vehicle for describing the plurality of Torah is wine. Just like there are many different types of wine, many different lines, many different flavors, similarly, Torah, compared to wine, has 70 different approaches. And it's not just based on how we taste and experience wine, but based on the numeric equivalent of the gematria of wine. And then there's a whole different metaphor which Chazal assert to describe the plurality of Torah. Source number 2 is the Gemara in Shabbos. It's based on a pasuk in Yirmiyah, like a hammer strikes a rock. And now it's not clear, keep in mind, what the hammer, what the rock is. But just like a hammer strikes a rock, nechlak lekama nitzotzos, the rock evidently splits into many different splinters, many different shards. Af kol dibur v'dibur shiyatzim mepi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, every word that HaKadosh Baruch Hu discharged at Har Sinai, nechlak l'shivim l'shonos, was then splintered into 70 different languages, and presumably not just different languages, for different views, different logics, different approaches. So Chazal established two different metaphors to describe the diversity of Torah. One is wine, and one is the rock or the hammer striking the rock. What are the differences between the diversity that's conveyed by the image of wine and the diversity which is conveyed through the image of a hammer striking a rock? Well, first of all, wine implies differences and diversity, but the wines are autonomous. One person crafts one type of wine, different person crafts a different type of wine, different regions, different grapes, different fermenting processes, different manufacturing process. The wines don't partake of each other. In fact, if the wines mix, then the taste will become spoiled, or not spoiled, but the unique taste of the wine will be ruined because of the foreign taste. Whereas when the rock is struck by a hammer and it splinters, the splintering effect suggests that there's one whole that then becomes splintered into partial segments or components, none of which is autonomous, none of which is complete, all of which can be reconfigured back into the puzzle that comprise the original rock. So on the one hand, Torah allows and can be interpreted in different styles and different approaches, but part of the diversity is because no human being can fully encompass the vast, sweeping knowledge, the entire rock of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because each person can only attain partial truth. And we'll get back to this a little bit later, the theory of partial truths. So part of what the difference between wine and the rock is that the wine suggests differences. The rock implies the theory of partial truths, that all those differences together comprise one unit, one whole, and each of us is only capable of a splinter. I think the second difference right now is that the wine deviates, or it diverges from each other more or less because of different conditions. Similarly, you place grapes from the wine country in France, and grapes from Napa Valley in California, and grapes from the Hermon, and you place them into different locations. The different lines, the different nutrients, the different minerals, the different environments would produce very, very different wines. Of course, human effort, human intervention coaxes this and facilitates and frames it. But essentially, it's a naturally evolving process of diversification. Whereas this image of a heavy hammer striking a rock suggests that it's human ingenuity, assuming the human beings are the hammer and the Torah is the rock that's being splintered into different pieces. Human beings are active in the process of diversification. Human beings are applying effort, ingenuity, mental energy towards the process of splintering the rock. Obviously, human beings are facilitating the different lines of wine, but their effort isn't as necessary. If not for human effort lifting the hammer and striking the rock would remain undivided, would remain integrated. So part of the difference between the rock and two issues which we'll talk about today is that the rock implies partial truths, which together combine to comprise one whole in a manner that wine doesn't. And second of all, the rock elicits the need for human ingenuity, creativity to invent, or at least to reconstruct some of those truths. These are the two primary images which Chazal established towards multiple truths in Torah. Now, when did this all start? Of course, it started at Har Sinai, when Torah was delivered. Source number 4. Amar Abaye de Amar Kra, Abaye quotes a pasuk in Tehillim, Achas Diber Elokim, Shtayim Zu Shamati. HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivered one word, and we heard it as two. Probably the most famous example is Zachar v'Shamar b'Dibur Echa Nemra. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says the word Zachar and Shamar together in a way that I can, because human beings can't recite two words at once. But in our ears, they sound different. We can't hear two ideas that overlap. There's got to be some gap or some discrepancy between them. And of course, the words Zachar and Shamar are not just different words. They're words that imply completely antithetical meaning. Shamar means to mark Shabbos by desisting and refraining and ceasing from activity, whereas Shamar implies an active announcement, a framing, an experience. So it's not just Hashem chooses two random words and merges them in a way that we can't hear, just to conjure this image of an integrated divine word which human beings hear as separate, but Hashem takes two different ideas, antithesis, Tameh and Tahor, Mutter and Asr, in this case Zachar and Shamar. They're not exclusive, but they certainly imply very different meanings. And Hashem says them together in Har Sinai. We're incapable of hearing them at once. Shta achas dibur Hashem, achas dibur Elokim, shtayim zu shamati. This is Chazal framing Har Sinai as the moment of that deviance. At the very moment of delivery, Hashem says one idea, one word, we hear it as two. In the case, again, the most celebrated case, Hashem says Zachar v'Shamar at once, simultaneously, and in our minds, in our imaginations, they deviate, and not just different words, but different mandates or different agendas for Shabbos. Now, this is, of course, referring to Tanakh, Hashem's word of Tanakh. It could have been circumscribed to Tanakh, and Tanakh is a story, and a story as a narrative can contain multiple layers of meaning. So you'd expect the story to contain moral messages, historical messages, prophetic messages. So the level of impacting, or the concept of impacting, or zipping into a narrative, multiple layers of meaning, makes sense. It doesn't challenge us to. Similarly, the fact that people, when they respond to Torah, can view it from different angles, which we call different hashkafos, and people, their viewpoints, their perspectives, their way of life, their framing of Torah and religion, that it should be different. Those make sense to us. What I'd like to discuss today is, what about halacha? What about logic? Logic, as opposed to narrative, feels very binary. It's either right or it's wrong. It's a math equation. It's either true or false. It can't be both. And it can't be two truths through a math statement. So shouldn't the logical parts of Torah, not the narrative parts of Torah? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivered Torah Shebechsav, he had multiple agendas, and he is fully capable of impregnating one layer of text with layers and layers and layers of meaning, and sometimes contradictory meaning, because it's a narrative. But what about when we read that text and we start to draw logical statements, logical conclusions, logical imperatives? Do we still have multiple truths? So here there are two statements of Chazal about what we would call Gemara or Halacha, and I'll distinguish between them a little bit later, but right now what we would call Torah Shebal Peh. One is a Gemara in Chagiga, and one is a Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara in Chagiga plays off of the pasuk in Koheles. Tamini Chachamim are sitting, Asufos, one of the last psukim in Koheles, they're sitting in groups. Halalu mitamin v'halalu mitarim. So now we're not just reading a pasuk in Tehillim or a pasuk in Shir Hashirim in multiple fashion, but we're reaching different conclusions of the halachic discourse. Halalu osim v'halalu matirim. Some say asur, some say mutar. Halalu poslim v'halalu machshim. These seem to be definite positions, definite logical exclusive positions. Shema yom adam hechani lamei tara me'ata. I've got all these deviations, what's right and what's wrong. Talmud lomar, kulam nitnu meroe echad. They were all delivered from one shepherd, that shepherd being Moshe. Don't think that there are these mistaken traditions and these corrupting ideas that are entering our tradition. They all came from Moshe's statement. Now notice, it's Moshe, not a Kodesh Baruch Hu, so as accurate as Moshe's rendition is, he's still a human being, and maybe people understand him in certain ways. Second of all, more importantly, the Gemara doesn't say that they're all true, because they all come from Moshe. Now, they could have been corrupted in the process, but at least no, you're in the playing field and you can undo those corruptions and recover that truth, but you're not dealing with foreign influences that have wormed their way or infiltrated the tradition. So the Gemara in Chagiyah is partial. It creates a holism. It all comes from Moshe's Masara. Don't feel that these are mistaken traditions, but it doesn't necessarily validate the truth of those respective positions. That is, of course, a more famous Gemara in Eruvin, Daf Yud Gimel. Shalosh Shanim Nechlagu Beishana Beisilo. The debates endured for 3 years. Yat Sabas call until a heavenly voice emerged and said, Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Both of these are the true word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And our question today is, what does that mean? 3 different approaches as to what Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chayim means in a general sense. How can they both be true? How could mutar be true and asur be true? How could pasul be true and kasher be true? How could tameh be true and Torah be true? We'll discuss the Nesivos HaMishpat's approach, Rav Yaakov Loiberbein, an 18th century Polish rabbi. We'll discuss a position which emerges from a very provocative statement in Rashi and Kesuvos. Then we'll discuss what I feel to be a very compelling idea stated by the Ritva, there's a Spanish Rishon, as well as Rav Shlomo Luria, a Polish rabbi in the 16th century. The Nesivos HaMishpat believes that there's really only one truth. But the process of sifting through partial truths or even false statements facilitates the pursuit of that one absolute truth. There is one truth, there is one psak, there is one reality. But I've got to sift through to learn mistake and error from truth, falsehood from truth. He says that's why Torah is compared to water and compared to pearls. When you're diving for pearls, it's cloudy, it's muddy, your vision is distorted. Your first couple dives, you may draw shards of pottery, clams, shells, garbage, refuse, because it's so cloudy, it's very hard diving. But after a while, you sift through your yield. You see, well, you understand your diving patterns, you learn about what things are meant to feel like, so then your next dive, you can move your eyes closed, you can feel the pearl, Let's take a look at his language and his introduction to his magnum opus in Yesivas HaMishpat and Chosh HaMishpat. Im shashagia b'atash sheker hu b'atzmuso. There are real mistakes. Mikom makom to'elas yesh bo l'chachamim. There is some benefit by reading mistaken opinions. He quotes a pasuk in Yeshaya, v'hamachasher lahazos tiyeh tachas yodecha. Ein adam omed al devar Torah or das Torah elam kein nichshel bo. The only road to truth is through trial and error. In lav dedali chasba, very famous aphorism of Chazal, had I not drawn the end of the piece, if I had not drawn pottery, I would never have found the pearl. This is the process of Torah study. You recite a bracha on it, you receive schar, but it still is skewing towards one apex, one truth, one final position. Rashi has a slightly more, let's say, sophisticated, but slightly complex approach. First of all, Rashi distinguishes between varying reports in the name of one person as opposed to different logical positions. Very often in the Gemara, we have two Talmidim who dispute what the Rebbe said. Sounds like our own world. What did Rabbi Soloveitchik say? What did this great rabbi say? So Rashi says, in that respect, chad minayu shaker. If they're debating what the Rebbe said, one report is accurate, one report is inauthentic. Aval Rashi says, ki pligi tre'amarai bedin. If the dispute surrounds logic, Isser, Heter, then Rashi takes a nuanced position. Each of these has validity, as opposed to the Nesivos, who implies there's only one objective, all-encompassing truth. There's validity to each approach, but Rashi says not abstractly, but logistically, because there are different contexts that will call for different logics and different applications and different positions. Ika Lameimar, listen to how Rashi interprets the Gemara in Erevin. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Why are they both legitimate? Not objectively and abstractly, but zimnim d'shayach haytaima, v'zimnim d'shayach haytaima, because our world provides different contexts. And in one context, one logic will be accurate. In a different context, a different logic will be accurate. So if we could just fix our world and freeze our world and create homogeneity of context and of people and of setting, there may be the one golden rule of every machlokes, but unfortunately, people are different, timing is different, generations are different, contexts are different. So we have to decide which truth fits the generation. Rashi falls short of discussing fundamental concepts of multiple truths or partial truths, but he certainly surpasses or goes beyond the Nesivos in suggesting that there's only one truth and everything else is mistaken, valuable, but mistaken. The most compelling, or the most, I would say, powerful definition of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim is the Ritva. The Ritva, a Spanish 14th century Rishon, Talmud of the Rashba, Talmud of the Ramban, the Ritva claims that at Har Sinai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivered 49 flowcharts, which would yield one position, 49 flowcharts, which would yield the antithetical position. Let me try to provide a little bit of backdrop for the Ritva. I said before that logic is binary. And if logic is binary, you would expect there to be one answer. But logic for human beings is binary because human beings were binaries, either on or off, yes or no, 0 or 1, night or day. HaKadosh Baruch Hu isn't binary. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything. And we say this every morning in our tefillos, Yotzer Or, Uvarei Choshech, Oseh Shalom, Uvarei Sakol. For us, it's either night or day. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is both because he lives outside of time. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he can encompass truths which to us seem irreconcilable, which to us seem antithetical, because we're just not wired from multiple truths. There was a 20th century Danish physicist named Niels Bohr, who once said, the opposite of a, more or less, the opposite of a true statement is a false statement. The opposite of a profound statement is another profound statement. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't deal in truths and falses. That's our world. Yes, no, black, white, on, off. HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals in profundities. And for HaKadosh Baruch Hu can deliver ideas which to us seem hard to reconcile because they seem diametrically opposed. In HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, they're complementary in ways that our minds simply are incapable of grasping. This is more or less how the Ritva defines Elu ve'elu. Source number 10. B'tirtzu. Ki k'sha'ala Moshe lamar l'kabel Torah. Moshe sends to Shemayim. Hashem displays 49 approaches to achieve Isser, 49 approaches to achieve Heter. And Moshe wonders, well, which is the right one? And Hashem says, She'ezeh masur l'chachmei Yisrael shebachol dor. I've given you all these approaches. Now each generation will have to work out which partial truth it feels is the most appropriate. It feels is the most true, not just the most context specific, as Rashi would say, but it feels is the most appropriate based on its inability to fully grasp the total sweep of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rav Shlomo Luria described it in a much more Kabbalistic fashion. Remember, for Rav Shlomo Luria, this is part of his polemic against the institutionalization of Psak. Rabbi Yosef Karo, his contemporary, wants to institutionalize Psak, and the Am Shel Shlomo is disapproving. So I'll get to the questions a bit later. Let me just finish this point, Larry. Everyone, not just those who are living, all Jews. The Kiblu derech memtest sinara. So here's a Kabbalistic metaphor to describe 49 different tracks, 49 different portals or conduits through which Hashem's knowledge was streaming. The Haim hakolos ashashomu v'gamro. The pasuk says the Jewish people saw the sounds. How could you see sound? They know they saw or they heard the sounds or they saw the other approaches that were streaming to people. He says, Kol echad ra derech sinar shelo fi hasakaso. Everyone saw based on his capacity, so it's not just diversity, it's also based on capacity. Ad she'echad yagiel l'tor, ve'asheni yagiel l'tzeachol l'tameh. One person reaches one conclusion, one person reaches another conclusion, and they seem to be diametrically opposed, polar inverses of one another, but they all came from Har Sinai through these conduits, through these tracks. Hashem doesn't need tracks. All these tracks stem from one infinite, integrated, indivisible being called HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But human beings need tracks, and human beings need partial truths. And this, of course, reverts back to what I said before about the rock. The image of the rock creating these splinter shards or these little pebbles, all those pebbles comprise one rock. But when human beings then manufacture Torah or experience Torah, we're incapable of understanding the totality of that Torah, so for us it just appears as splinters. This is the approach of the Ritva and the Yam Shel Shlomo. And just to summarize, there are three approaches to Elu ve'elu. The least, or the minimalist, the Nesivos, there is one truth. The other opinions are incorrect but valuable. Rashi, there's an elastic Torah that bends itself to different contexts. But in theory, if there were one context that were similar or identical for all human experience, there may be one truth that would prevail. For the Ritva and the Yam Shel Shlomo, it's just multiple truths, because the human mind is incapable of grasping the totality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's sweep. I wonder, well, Larry, there was a question. Let me just try to answer Larry's question. Larry asked, even in our world, fuzzy logic. Okay, a little bit above my pay grade, Larry, but be interested to hear about fuzzy logic. I have a hard enough time with regular logic, so I think most of my logic is fuzzy. But rational, disprovable, non-rational. Okay, like I said, I minored in math, but we're talking about some other, not this type of math. Anyway, so I'm sorry, Larry, getting back to the sources. Now, what's interesting about the Ritva and the Yam Shel Shlomo is that even in their most flexible view of different positions, tar, tameh, antithetical, diametrically opposed, they were all delivered at Har Sinai, just they were delivered through different routes, different tracks, different flow charts, the 49 of the Ritva, the different conduits of the Yam Shel Shlomo. But then essentially, when we're studying Gemara, we're reconstructing those multiple approaches that splintered at Har Sinai. There's a different medrash that makes it sound like that creative differences in Gemara is not just reconstructing the diversity of Har Sinai, but is actually innovating and inventing new ideas that stem from the system. So, for example, there's one medrash that says that at Har Sinai, Moshe receives everything. When I say everything, I mean everything. What did Moshe receive at Har Sinai? he receives Mikra, source 13, Mishnah, Talmud, Agada, Afilu Mashe Talmud Vasik Asid Laharis Lefei Rabbo. Any good svara that one of my Talmidim will say tomorrow in Shir was already discussed between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe that in the year 2020, Tafshin Pei, there'll be a Shir Dalit Israeli, will be in a Taragin Shir, nor is a good svara about Bechor and Pishnai. Everything was delivered, but multiple tracks, and then our Machloksin reestablished those multiple tracks, reconstruction. There's another medrash based on the pasuk in Kitisa. Vayiteinu Moshe kechalosel ledaber. This makes it sound like klalim lamdu HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe. That Har Sinai HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivers to Moshe the klalim. Those of you who are learning Shabbos now, Daf Yomi, klal gadol. So the first Mishnah delivers the klal. As we know, there are a lot of details that aren't listed in the Mishnah, but can be drawn from those klalim. So is this medrash suggesting that HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivers a lot of klalim? We assume all the Gemaras, all the halachas, all the Chadosh Sinais, all the Gzeros, but not every single possible svara. And any time a person studying innovates a svara, as long as it coheres to the logic of the system, as long as it isn't deviant from the system, as long as it's in bounds within the system, then it's considered as if it was given in Har Sinai, because it's based on the playbook that HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivers to Moshe. Hashem doesn't expect Moshe to receive every play. He gives him the basic plays. When I say basic, I mean voluminous sefer plays, infinite, 40 days and 40 nights, but not every single logical idea, which will be expressed by a Talmud. So the Ritva and the Am Shel Shlomo assume that everything was given, or imply everything was given in Har Sinai, and we're just trying to reconstruct that diversity. There is a medrash that implies that we have the possibility within the system of deriving and innovating within those truths. Now, of course, the problem with this broader view of partial truths stems from a Gemara in, let me find the Gemara for you, a Gemara, it's not right here, I apologize, let me find the Gemara for you, just a second. I apologize. Okay, I'll just quote the Gemara Baal Peh because we're short of time. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Peches Amud Beis. I'll just quote one key line from it. The Gemara says that for many years they had one truth. Misherabu Talmidei Shammai v'Hillel. When the Talmidim of Shammai v'Hillel were so numerous, Shelo Shimshu Kol Tzarcham. They didn't learn as avidly and as fervently as they could have or should have, or they didn't interact with their rebbeim because they were too numerous. They got too large to actually learn properly or to receive the same tradition from their rebbes. But the language is Shelo Shimshu Kol Tzarcham. Rabu Machlokis b'Yisrael. Disputes erupted within the Jewish people. V'naseis Torah kishel shtei Torahs. So I'll read the language again. When the Talmidim of Hillel and Shammai didn't study properly, Shelo Shimshu Kol Tzarchan, part 2 of the phrase, Machloksin erupted. V'naseis Torah kishtei Torahs. And then Torah became splintered as if they were two. If you read this Gemara literally, it does imply, it does assert that there is one truth. And for thousands of years, that one truth was preserved. And that one absolute truth was just abandoned when the Talmidim didn't study fervently enough and avidly enough. And that machlokis is not a reflection of multiple truths, as the Ritva and the Am Shel Shlomo say, or even as Rashi suggests in a more minimalist stance, but it's more like the Nesivos. It was one truth. And for thousands of years, there was a consensus about that one truth. And then Talmidim lost that one truth, but there still is an elusive one truth that we're trying to recover. Perhaps the alternate way to read this Gemara is that when people studied Torah so fervently before this breakdown or before this lapse or decline, they had the mental tenacity to see differences and to find the common denominator, to integrate them, to see beyond the limited human binary logic. Many people listening here are older. Think about your own experiences in life and people and ideas that you thought at earlier stages in your life were antithetical and were mutually exclusive. And then as you grew older, your mind became more agile, your mind became more supple and flexible. He says, well, they really are not as different as I thought. They just look different. The externals are different. They're much more similar than I thought. So the ability to take two opposites and merge them and unite them is a mental flexibility, a mental talent, and it requires immersion in Torah that maybe declined even a bit, and they were unable to. If you look back at that language, mental maturity, Ilana, if you look back at that language in the Gemara, and in the language, Shelo Shimshu Kol Tzarcham, they didn't serve, they didn't study as they should have. This is not the page. Venasu Torah Kashtei Taras. And then Torah became two different tracks. Namely, they were always differences of opinion, but they were still reconcilable to one Torah. People were able to take Tamei and Torah and see beyond my ability to explain, because we're so far downstream. They're able to take this and create integration, create symmetry, create holism. But then they lost that ability because their immersion in Torah just receded. So this is a summary of some of the different positions of Elu va'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Obviously, a lot of people who are listening to the shir are very much drawn to the world of learning Be'iyun. Many of you who've learned in yeshiva, who spent much of your time in Torah, reading a machlokas between the Ketzosim and the Nesivos, between Abaye and Rava, between the Rambam and the Ravid, between Rav and Shmuel, without this assumption that one is right or one is wrong. And a lot of us feel much more drawn to the Ritva and the Yam Shel Shlomo than to the Nesivos. It would be horrifying to me to look back at my life and to think that I've spent tens of thousands of hours sifting through pieces of sand and pieces of pottery. I'd much rather see that I'm sifting through partial truths of Hashem's mind that I don't have the ability to integrate, but they're all Elu ve'elu because they were all delivered at Har Sinai and they'll represent Hashem's truth. Let me conclude the shir with 2 points. Number one, whatever flexibility and elasticity Torah demonstrates, it's clear that that's in the more abstract field of learning Gemara, Talmudic analysis, Talmudic assessment. When it comes to the world of halachic applicability, clearly uniformity, to a degree, is much more advisable, much more built in. Now I say clearly because you'd have to distinguish between the pre-Shulchan Aruch world and the post-Shulchan Aruch world. If we go back to the pre-Shulchan Aruch world, there was much more pluralism in halacha. If you lived in France, you made Kiddush like the Bein Hatam. If you lived in Spain, you made Kiddush like the Ramban, or the Rambam. So it was completely common, completely acceptable to travel 2 days and to discover an entirely different community, even if you were Sephardi, giving very, very different customs. Because of the destabilization of the Jewish experience, primarily instigated by the Spanish Inquisition in the late 15th century, and because of other historical factors, Yosef Karo decided that there has to be one unifying halachic approach, which I alluded to before, was hotly debated by the Yam Shel Shlomo and others, but history was on the side of Yosef Karo. Even before Yosef Karo, where there's much more flexibility, but obviously in the days of the Gemara, Chazal were very aware how to paskel, and they didn't leave things open-ended because halachic practice has to be uniform. In the world of practice, we do have to live in a binary world where you can only take lulav one way. We can only make Kiddush one way. So we can only put on tefillin one way, but some people put on 2 tefillin. But most mitzvos have that, or Maveros have that exclusivity. So, and that's why you find a lot of people that are comfortable in the world of Gemara, they're not as comfortable in the world of halachic psak. Those who are involved in the world of halachic psak are less comfortable because there are different ways of viewing Torah. There are different mind tools. When I'm learning a sugya, I'm trying to find as many possibilities as I can, justify as many of them, find the logical underpinnings to each of them, with the assumption that every position was based on some grounded halachic Talmudic idea. And I'm not weighting them, W-E-I-G-H-T, oh, this was said by the Rambam, this was only said by the Tosas Rid. I'm trying to climb back into the mind of the Tosas Rid in Italy, say, well, how did he view the sugi? Because he was one of those 49. He captured one of those tracks. And if I could put myself into his brain and use his ideas as a gloss to the sugya, I can discover a track beyond the one that I'm currently operating on. So to me, when I see another position, I'm not trying to negate or to nullify, I'm trying to propagate and to build and to create streams and charts and models. Whereas a halachaist is trying to streamline. What are the major opinions? Okay, this is an opinion, but it's a shitas yachid. And this is the Rambam. This is, it's weighted more than a shita of a different. So that's why you find that primarily people that are involved in the world of lumbus, as we call it, shy away. You have to give a psak, but they shy away from excelling in the world of psak. So just take, for example, I mentioned the Yam Shel Shlomo. Well, I should probably use a modern example. If you read, let's say, Rav Aji Yosef, the preeminent posek of the last 150 years, you find that it's very much streamlining rather than creating models. We wouldn't call it classical lumdus. There's lumdus to be taken out of it because it's all the internal logic of the Gemara's calculus, but the agenda is almost anti-lumdus. It's not to create and to justify and validate different approaches, but to eliminate and to create a streamlined funnel. Think of it as a funnel towards that conclusive final position. Whereas Gemara is not a funnel, it's a tree. It's an inverted funnel. And we're trying to find as many branches as we can and organize all the branches. But certainly we don't feel that in the world of halacha, we're shading. We'd like to shade towards greater homogeneity. The final point I wanted to make is as follows. And this I say specifically to a crowd that I feel is heavily flavored with Gush people, people that studied in the yeshiva, people that are affiliated with the yeshiva. I'm sure there are people who are joining us as welcome guests as well. And it's an appropriate statement, but I think it's important and resonant message for people that have experienced the Gush. I think that what made our experience in Yeshivat and Har Sinai so powerful is that we did receive consistency of derech. There was one approach to learning that was very powerfully imbued. It was consistent. You moved from one share to another. And there are differences, but the differences are secondary. Differences are subtle. Second of all, the approach to life. Very similar hashkafa, very similar yardstick of how to view life, how to render decisions about life. And I think it's very powerful. I think it's very grounding. I remember, I'm talking to the 20-year-olds now. I remember when I was your age, and when I compared myself to some of my friends, I didn't feel they were as equipped. And I feel that their approach was much more patchwork and much more of a mosaic, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and a little bit. And I found a consistency of approach, both in learning and in life, to be very stabilizing and very empowering. I felt that it provided me with a singular, consistent processor, and I could make sense of my world. But I think that that can also become imprisoning. And for us, or people like that, it's important to stretch your mind and stretch your imagination and understand that as powerful as your approach is, it's one of 49 or one of 70, or as the Yam Shel Shlomo say, one of 600,000, both in the way we view the world, as well as in the way you study Torah, and not to allow the derech to become an imprisoner rather than an empowering agent. So for that end, I'd like to conclude, this will be my last minute, with the Gemara in Tainus. The Gemara in Tainus, the final image, we talked about the hammer, and we talked about the wine. The final image is the Gemara in Tainus. Amar Ula Bira, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Asira Kadosh Baruch Hu Lasos Mechol Tzadikim. One day HaKadosh Baruch Hu will align all the tzaddikim in a circle. Hashem will occupy the midpoint of the circle. And the tzaddikim are aligned along the radius of the circle. Why is the final alignment of the tzaddikim geometrically compared to a circle? Why not a square? Why not a triangle? Why not a rectangle? What makes a circle geometrically unique? Because a circle possesses infinite equidistant radii. You can draw equal infinite radii to the circumference of the circle. Now, if you occupy a place in the circle and you measure 180 degrees away from you, you are diametrically opposed. Our phraseology, 180 degrees. We see things 180 degrees different. But you're each seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu with equal measure. And you're each equidistant to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's important, and that's why it's important to specifically try to understand the approaches that are most different from you. If let's say you walk into, the yeshiva down the block, and the people in America, you walk into YU, you feel, things in YU are pretty similar to the feel in Gush. They're not that different setting, slightly different tonality. But if you walked into, the shtibel down the block, then you'd be getting closer to the 180. And if you moved even further, again, the circle is the limiter. The circle is basic Shmiras HaMitzvos, the Kabbalah HaMitzvos, Shmiras HaMitzvos, Torah. That would be an important part of this conversation to define what the circle maintains. But as long as you're within that circle, whatever we define to be legitimate Masara-based orthodoxy, or based religion, then those different approaches would all be legitimate. So that's the circle which I feel conveys the partial truths that the Ritva and the Yam Shel Shama addressed. Okay, thank you, Yoel.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Taragin. I will just say that, Rav Bick is getting on in at 12:40 or 7:40. Rav Taragin, I don't know if you're checking out. I don't know if you have a minute. People, I can unmute people if they have questions. Whoever wants to take a break could take a break until Rav Bick is on. But Rabbi Taragin, do you have a minute or two to take questions, or you have?
Sure.
I will unmute whoever wants to mute. Well, let's figure this one out. And has a question, I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves and try to see if we can get a question or two. If there are any, no pressure.
Taragin.
Yes.
Just coming back to a point that you made about feeling like if some of the if you looked at things as being binary, that some of the time you spent looking at the opinions that were wrong would have been a waste of time. And that is maybe a reason not to adopt that sort of binary way of looking at things. But couldn't one say that even if you approach things in a binary way, that even though they might theoretically be technically wrong, that studying wrong opinions that are close to right opinions helps you better understand the right opinions, even though they're technically wrong?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Those are the exact words of the Nesivos. And his metaphor is diving for pearls and retrieving shards of pottery or stones or valueless gems. But I still find it very difficult. I'm spending, let's say, volume-wise, 85% of my time with pottery, only to retrieve 15% of pearls. And I don't just speak for myself. You open up any people who are deeply immersed in the world of Talmud, they spend as much time on Beis Shammai as they do in Beis Hillel. Like suddenly they spend more time because there's less information available. So the arc of Talmudic analysis doesn't follow the arc of halachic conclusion. It's an equalizer. It creates the equivalence. Every position in the Gemara is equal for the analyst. Every position in the Gemara is not equal for the posek. Even at the Gemara's level of psak, let alone subsequent psak.
Rabbi Taragin, not to put you on the spot, but Rabbi Taragin, if you have a way to post your source sheets and people ask for it, whether you email it to me or if you can put it on the chat, a link to it or an attachment.
I'm going to do both. I'll put it on the chat now as we speak. Okay.
And it's also being video recorded and we'll upload it to the Yeshiva's YouTube. But
okay, for some reason, I'm not allowed to share it on the chat. Maybe because I'm not the host or something. It keeps rejecting it. But I'll send it to
your co-host. Okay.
No. Yo, maybe I'll send it to you now and you can post it during our big share. Okay?
Okay.
I'll send you an email as we speak and you can post it.
Okay. Okay. If there's another question, Rav Bick is in 3 minutes. I know, again, if somebody else, if you have time, Rabbi Taragin, you want to take another question?
I'm plenty of time. I just sent it to you as a...
And Rav Bick, I will make Rav Bick also a co-host, so he can post as well.
Well, it's good to see everyone and a Chag Sameach. At least those who I see and those who I see a blank screen.
Rav Taragin?
Yes, Alex.
Hey, a question about the Ritva and the Yam Shel Shlomo. If we're saying that they're partial, kind of all like partial truths, that still means that none of them is really the truth. It's just the partial truth, basically.
There can't be the truth.
There is no real such thing as like the truth besides for like, the original rock, and everything is kind of just part of that. Okay.
Right. The only real truth is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's totality, and no human being can encompass that sweep. But yet, with halachic application, we have to decide upon our truth. Which truth will we accredit as the most compelling truth that will then become the halachic norm? Okay, I give it over to Rebik.
Okay, so we'll just thank you very much, Rabbi Taragin, and thank you for joining. And we will begin in 2 minutes with Rav Ezra Bick, if that's okay. And I will mute everyone again, give an opportunity for people to join who may not have been able to get on earlier, and of course understand that other people may have obligations if they have to sign off. And once again, we will be recording this and uploading into the Yeshiva YouTube channel.